Well, what I really enjoy about living in Montana is the openness of the country and the mountains.
Environment around here gives you a chance to do a lot of things outdoors in a non-populated area or low-populated area.
It's kind of quiet and pleasant to go around and nothing to be scared about.
I love the 4 seasons of the year. I'd hate to live in a place where you only had one season, so I enjoy spring, winter, summer, fall, all seasons.
Well, I've lived in Montana all my life, but I have stayed in other states at periodic times. I love the beauty of the country. It's such a wide variety. You can have the plains or the mountains or the trees or lakes. There's a change of seasons, which makes it really nice.
I don't think the quality of life as yet in Montana is threatened. I think the state has done a very good job of managing its resources, and I think as far as bringing like industry into the state and things like that, I think it's been better the past 5 or 6 years as far as the laws that have been legislated than it used to be.
I don't think so. I don't feel that we're threatened at all.
No, I really don't, because you're looking at people and their reactions to everything around them, and if it's going to be up to the people of Montana to take care of their own lifestyle. So I don't think it's threatened.
Well, possibly to a certain extent, but I live in a small community, and there, for the most part, it isn't.
I believe it is, because more and more people are visiting Montana in the summer months, and it's threatening the environment of our national park.
I think that it is somewhat. I think that we're having more problems with air pollution all the time, that perhaps we are having some problems with overcrowding.
I think that we grow accustomed to having so much nature and space around us that we're more relaxed, we're friendlier, we're not so afraid of other people.
Montanans are friendly. They're great people. They're fun, exciting. They're just excellent people.
Well, I think Montanans are open people. They're friendly. They don't really care who you are or where you're from. They'll say hi anytime they feel like it to you, you know. And that's what I love about it here. I don't think I would ever leave.
People are the most friendly. They're the most open. The type of people that you can get close to, the type of people that will come alongside and help anytime you need help. The people really is what makes Montana special.
We are just now beginning to define a sense of self as Montanans. Our long history of corporate exploitation and natural disaster, coupled with a harsh climate and remote terrain, made us doubt ourselves for a long time. Part of the difficulty in analyzing and accepting ourselves lies in the many contradictions of our state's history. Clark C. Spence noted this when he wrote, "If part of the inheritance is ugly, cut-over stumplands, Butte's grotesque Berkeley pit, and raw wind-whipped soil where once grass grew lush, another part is still wild, unspoiled scenery, horizons without end, and the immensity of land and sky." The pressure to conform to national definitions of success and progress is great. Although those same ideals threaten what we value and what outsiders value in us as well, events of the last 20 years have forced us to reassess our ideals and principles. What do we truly value?
If one defines liberalism as favoring government intervention and conservatism as opposing government intervention, I think we can say that those issues have always been very important in this state from the advent of statehood. And to summarize this very briefly, I think that one can say that Montana has presented a liberal face nationally, in the sense that most of our senators have been liberal in their political orientation. They've gone to Washington, most of our congressmen, with the idea of getting all of the federal support they can for the state. But looking at state politics, I think the tradition is perhaps more conservative. And I explain that by the fact that Montana is a land of raw materials and limited resources. And we practice a kind of politics of retrieval. That is, we need to send liberals to Washington to get federal largesse back into the state, and we need to conserve our own resources. And I think that division has fit fairly well with the two-party system we have in Montana. It's a fairly competitive two-party system, but we tilt toward the Republican side or more conservative side in the state. We tilt, I think, toward the more liberal or Democratic side nationally.
We spend a lot of our time, too much of our time, in reading and studying the history of Montana, devoting our attention to bizarre characters like Liver-Eating Johnson or Calamity Jane, whose historical importance is almost nil. The anomaly of that is that there are a number of very influential personalities in the history of the state who have played major roles, who receive very little attention. The classic example of that is the political tradition of modern Montana history, which has given to the United States an inordinate number of very influential and very admirable people, especially from such a small state. Some examples. In the 1890s, Senator Thomas Carter, a conservative Republican, played a key role in the creation of Glacier Park, served as President Benjamin Harrison's campaign manager. Or the progressive Republican Senator Joseph Dixon, who managed Teddy Roosevelt's 1912 campaign and later served as governor in the early 20s, bucking the mining industry, and is now remembered as perhaps the state's best governor. Congresswoman Jeannette Rankin, who is remembered in American history as being the only individual to vote against our entry into both World War I and World War II. Jeannette Rankin, in fact, was not only the first congresswoman in American history, but the first woman from any Western nation to be elected to a parliamentary body, an amazing distinction. One goes on to the 1920s, to the famous liberal Democratic pair of senators, Thomas Walsh and Burton Wheeler. Walsh may well be the most distinguished political figure in the history of this state or of most states. He served in the Senate as a Wilson Democrat. He played an incredibly capable role in uncovering the Teapot Dome scandal under the Harding administration. He presided over 2 Democratic national conventions and was appointed Attorney General by President Roosevelt, the only Montanan who ever was, although tragically he died before he could take that post. Burton K. Wheeler, probably the most powerful politician in the state's history, remembered especially for leading the U.S. Senate coalition that defeated Roosevelt's court-packing bill, remembered as probably the most powerful of all the isolationists before World War II. Lee Metcalf, the powerful Democratic liberal conservationist, and of course Mike Mansfield, who served longer than any other senator as majority leader of that body and is now the ambassador to Japan. That indeed is a remarkable record.
I think circumstances could change. If you look at the 1970s, for example, there was a shift of our population became more urban. The 7 largest counties in the state now have about 60% of the registered voters. 30 years ago, they had about, say, 40%. So that the urban counties are getting more power in the state. Urban populations tend to be more liberal, so that to some extent, we could say that things might become more liberal. But conceivably, other issues could arise as well, because I think we're also shifting from an economy that relies on the production of goods to an economy that is more service-oriented. That, too, could change the complexion as people become perhaps more middle-class, service-oriented in their orientation. They might tend conceivably to become more conservative in the future.
One of the most significant changes the new Constitution made was in the clarification of Montana's water rights. For the first time, we as a state claimed the water that flowed within our borders. We also made it a priority to establish a physical record, on paper, of all our claims.
Native Americans are really confused with all the claims on the water. And of course, we know that there's a national move to move the water to the southern states, to the southwestern states, to the areas where they can get, 4 or 5 crops of alfalfa or whatnot. And but we need the water on our reservations up in Indian country also. And of course, there are Indians in the Southwest that, you know, want to keep the water on their reservation so that they can farm and, you know, become self-sufficient, which we're all searching for. And it's really a struggle. We see a national move like the state of Montana. This last legislature, there was a, you know, talk of selling water to out of state. And, you know, they're talking about selling this water. And we feel that this water here, you know, is our water as it flows through the reservation, and we have a right to use it, as much of it as we want and as much as we'll need in the future. And we don't care for the idea of it, state laying claim to it and then attempting to sell it out of state. If the state would recognize that Indian reservations were established before Montana became a state, and would recognize the Indians' right to the water on the reservation, would really resolve a lot of conflicts, because I think we can, our tribe has established a water code and is certainly very capable of carrying out, you know, the adjudication of water rights on the reservation, could manage the water on the reservation, and it would just make it much easier. People would work together then, they wouldn't be polarized, and we find that when they do work together, they get along much better. And if we could do that, I think it would just help us, and I know it would other reservations too. That would certainly help Blackfeet Reservation, the Fort Peck Reservation, the Crow Reservation, and those other reservations too.
With 40 to 107 billion tons of coal in thick seams close to the surface, Montana has more coal than any state in the nation. In an energy-poor country, we're rich. Strip mining offers employment and the opportunity to make money, at least for a while. No one denies that it's ugly and destructive. But developers and proponents see it as a choice between blight and unemployment. Unfortunately, that argument obscures harder questions, questions about the role Montana wants to play in the world.
Well, I see the strip mining as being beneficial to our state. Certainly it provides jobs that would not otherwise be available. Once Project 3 and 4 are operational, we'll have between 11 and 1,200 people working here in the mines and in the power plants. The jobs are good paying jobs, steady incomes. If there's anything that our state is probably lacking, it is industrial development. Most of our young people, when they graduate from high school or from college, whatever, generally have to go out of state to find employment. There are some secondary benefits, certainly, that have to do with the multiplier effect of Colstrip providing jobs for other people. The construction industry certainly benefited by Colstrip at a time when our state didn't have a lot of construction jobs.
We have a commercial center mall up here now, which was built in '76, I believe. That houses approximately 10 businesses, which has helped the town out immensely. We now have a large grocery store here, which at the time in 1974 when I moved here, and 2 years after that, we had just a small little store on the end of a warehouse down the street here, which had milk and bread and only a few necessities, 2 gas pumps. Now we have 2 gas stations currently operating.
Wealth, prosperity, jobs, community. How long will it last? Ask opponents of strip mining. And what are the costs?
Well, strip mining is a threat, I think mainly now because they don't want to control it. Our original option was to ban strip mining, which would have done away with the problem completely. It wasn't that simple. We opted to try to find suitable places to strip mine and to regulate it. Well, to start out, as an individual and perhaps as the organization, we started out fighting for our own rights and for our own, to protect our own little possessions. We have gone far beyond that. And I would say now that we are out to protect first the agriculture, the air, the land, the water, and so on, as I said before. But we are also out to show that one person, one organization, one group of people can really make a difference. And Northern Plains is making a difference in the face of big industry, big bucks, and the conglomerates.
The boom or bust cycles of all our previous enterprises loom in the background of the debate on coal. In part, our memory of many failures prompted the state legislature to enact a coal severance tax in 1975. It had reached the conclusion, wrote one analyst, that the ultimate consumer should share environmental and economic costs. No longer would it subsidize the plunder of the soil or allow unregulated mining without curbs. The same kind of political activism and civic concern that created a new constitution for Montana led to a stiff coal severance tax.
In 1981, the United States Supreme Court rendered a very controversial decision when it allowed to stand Montana's 30% coal severance tax. That decision is very important in its own right and what it may mean for the future, for the economic development of this state. But what's especially significant about it, in my opinion, is what it symbolizes, which is the passing of the old era of economic colonialism of the West. There's a lovely irony in this, in that states of the upper Midwest, among others, are very critical of the coal severance tax, saying it makes of states like Montana and Wyoming a new Western OPEC by which they will imperialize the East, which we have always thought imperialized us. It sort of reflects the situation in our northern neighbor, Canada, the tension between the energy-producing prairie provinces and the more industrialized and populous East, which feels that the high energy-producing provinces are exploiting them. And of course, the current also runs to the contrary. The Montana coal severance tax certainly symbolizes the end of the era of economic colonialism in this region and the beginning of a new era of development that will be far different from anything we have seen in the past.
This concern for the future has created a new sense of purpose and community throughout the state. Instead of acting like a helpless maiden, piteously exploited, Montana has begun to challenge the values of the rest of the nation. We have begun to aggressively protect what is ours. This activism is nothing really very new. It had its roots during the Progressive Era, when Montanans of all classes joined together to pass legislation for the common good. This same civic spirit works today as individuals use the initiative process to change existing laws and to make new ones.
We have had initiative and referendum since 1906, and there have been two great waves of the use of this. One came in the 2 decades following adoption of initiative and referendum, and then another in the 1970s when the new Constitution made the process of initiative and referendum both a little easier, a little more liberal. You have to recognize that you can use initiative and referendum with regard to either a law in Montana or with regard to a constitutional amendment. And most recently, again, after the new Constitution, we have seen a spate of constitutional amendments and citizen participation like we haven't seen since the populist progressive period. Basically, the difference between an initiative and a referendum is that an initiative is, as the name suggests, something initiated by the people. A law or a constitutional amendment can be put on the ballot once a sufficient number of signatures on petitions have been obtained in a prescribed number of Montana counties. A referendum, on the other hand, is something that the legislature uses when it's not quite sure what the people of Montana might want, and it refers back then to the people a law that they have formulated.
I think people become more active politically when the issues are clearly drawn. If people perceive that it doesn't make any difference, they're less likely to become active. But in the case of Montana, we have always been relatively a competitive two-party state, and the issues have been often sharply drawn, and this is one reason I think why Montanans as a whole tend to have a higher rate of participation than many other states in the country. Probably in the future, as we become more urban, as communication improves with the spread of television and other media, there will be greater awareness of issues, and in that sense, it could lead to greater political activism in the state.
The United States government has verbalized policy in strengthening the tribal government to government relationship between the various Indian nations and the United States government. That kind of strengthening must occur to strengthen that government to government relationship. American Indians are going to have to be trained and begin to be involved in the development of their natural resources. They are going to make sure they are going to have to be involved in the kinds of development that takes place, whether it is oil and gas leasing, and to what degree that is going to occur and under what conditions. Native Americans are very talented individuals. They have lived on this land for thousands upon thousands of years. And we are equal to the task of wanting to provide the kind of good and adequate lifestyle that we as American citizens are entitled to, but we would like to be involved in that decision making. If natural resources exist on our reservation, we are quite willing to share this with the rest of the country. If we have the kinds of resources that are needed in terms of maintaining energy, then we are quite willing to share that, but we would like to share that and make sure that that occurs in ways that are compatible with maintaining the cultures of American Indians. We have to be involved, we have to continue to develop our young people who are our most valuable resource as Native Americans. They have to have the kind of adequate training that will make them proficient in helping to mold the future of the tribes from which they come. They have to be educated. We have need of medical doctors. We have need of dentists. We have need of engineers. We have need for hydrologists. We have need for all kinds of individuals. So we have to continue to look to educating the younger Native Americans. I see that probably as the only kind of solution to Native Americans in the future, to have a very highly trained personnel of Indian descent that are sensitive to the needs of American Indians and can help chart courses that are going to be culturally compatible, no longer eroding the culture of Native Americans, and yet lead to the building of very satisfying lifestyles in a highly technological society.
Within this atmosphere of political action, an almost instinctive environmentalism has grown up. It began in the 1960s when a group in Missoula waged its own small war against the city's air pollution. It continued on through the 1970s and into a new constitution which made a point of protecting our water resources. And in the 1980s, numerous groups are working hard against threats they see to the environment. From the efforts of the Northern Plains Resource Council to limit strip mining, to the campaigns of those opposing the placement of more nuclear missiles in Montana. These issues evoke strong feelings because our roots tap so deeply into the environment. And because we belong to the rest of the world, we want to join the momentum of its progress. The resulting conflict is exceedingly difficult. The final decisions that we have to make right now may come easier once we realize our participation in the historical process is inescapable, and that we live in a continuum between past and future.